Recording. Okay.
As we get ready to welcome our guest speaker, I want to invite us to use a form of applause from the deaf culture. Instead of clapping, we raise our hands and gently shake them side to side. It's a beautiful, visible way to show appreciation. So let's do that when we welcome her. Emily Power is the founder of Ocean Made, transitioned from her corporate role at Microsoft to ocean entrepreneurship. Her journey was sparked by Bren Smith's seaweed farming feature on 60 Minutes, leading her to discover the potential of seaweed as a sustainable resource. Emily's mission is to bridge the gap between terrestrial agriculture and ocean innovation, particularly through her biodegradable seed starter pot, Kelp pots. Her work not only addresses plastic pollution, but also supports the blue economy by promoting sustainable practices in gardening and agriculture. Emily's story is a testament to the power of creativity and sustainability, inspiring many to make a positive impact on the planet. Everyone, please welcome Emily.
And please mute your speaker. That's so cool.
Well, thank you everybody for having me here. And by the way, I'm in presenter mode, so I can't see if anything's going in the chat, but if you have questions, feel free to throw them in there and we can also, go through those at the end. If there's anything that I, don't cover here, I'm hoping to offer quite a bit of time for Q&A because I feel like that's a very useful use of our time because I want to get into the nitty gritty if I don't go over it in the overview. But I just want to say how honored I am to be here and share a little bit about the invention that I've created, but also really to just have the wisdom of master gardeners. I am not currently a master gardener myself, but I hope to be one day. My mom is a master gardener, though. She also runs Mary Moore Community Garden out here in Washington, which is one of our biggest parks in the Seattle area and one of our biggest community gardens in the state. My grandpa was also a farmer in Michigan, so I've been weeding since I could walk, so it's kind of in my DNA. But my dad also has always been really into ocean conservation, and so from a very young age, he instilled the importance of conserving our oceans to me. And I was an intern at the Seattle Aquarium when I was younger and thought I wanted to be a marine biologist, but there's too much math involved in that. So I switched careers, but I've always really loved the ocean, and that love has run deep for me. And so, as I found more out about seaweed, it was just kind of a natural fit. So I'll get into sort of the genesis of kelp pots and why they were created. I'm sure this photo is probably a familiar concept to all of you. Um, as a gardener, I think, if you've grown enough plants, this pot pile starts to build up. And I was really sick of all of the plastic waste, the plastic pots, the plastic bags, the trays, the tools, everything. And I had learned a lot about how urban gardens produce more carbon than they actually sequester, which feels so counterintuitive as a gardener. And you just really want to create a green space. And it just felt so icky to know that all of the plastic that we were consuming and the way that, all of those tools are brought to you as a consumer ends up contributing to a lot of carbon in our atmosphere. And so, like many gardeners, I kind of moved towards that path of, okay, well, is there an alternative to plastic? And so I tried a bunch of different biodegradable containers, peat being the main one that's right on the market right now. But I also tried ones that are made out of cocoa coir and tapioca and wood and other types of bioplastics and just anything that I could get my hands on, I did try. And then, like I had mentioned, I was starting to learn about how amazing seaweed was for plants and all of the innovation that was happening in the seaweed space, from animal feeds to biostimulants to fertilizers to fuels to pharmaceuticals and nutraceuticals to structures and bioplastics to textiles and even batteries. And I had seen that 60 Minutes from Bren Smith talking about if you have $20,000 in a boat, you can have a seaweed farm. And it turns out it's actually not that easy. I really did want to be a seaweed farmer and wanted to quit my job to start my own seaweed farm, but there's a lot of red tape, especially here in Washington. But by that point, I was really hooked on this concept of seaweed and had been thinking a lot about, how can I integrate seaweed into people's lives that don't require eating it? Because A lot of people don't really love the taste of seaweed. um, but is there a way that we could educate people on how amazing this gift is that Mother Nature has given us? You know, it's the ancestor to all terrestrial plants. And I would say it's the most amazing gift that Mother Nature has given us, and it's incredibly underutilized and undervalued for what it is, especially given the fact that we're running out of fresh water and we're running out of land. You know, seaweed grows on all coastlines, and it grows really fast. And so I really wanted to introduce this concept to people, but I really didn't know how. And so I had started Ocean Made several years ago as a marketplace for seaweed and ocean-based products. I really wanted to be like the next Amazon of sustainable items. But leaving my job from a corporate sales position at Microsoft, I found myself just putting more ads on the internet for companies. And a lot of those companies were greenwashing things. And it turns out that, you know, people don't go to a website to find a product made out of a certain material. They go to a website to buy a product that solves a problem, and then they hope that it's made out of a sustainable material, or is considered a sustainable product. So one day I was just out in the garden, and I was sitting there looking at all of the plastic pots and all of the plastic waste that I was producing and thinking about seaweed, and realized there is no biodegradable container that really makes an attempt to weave in a nutrient base into the pot. And seaweed has so many amazing properties and is so great for plants that I think the clouds just parted one day, and I had this idea of what if we took the structure of a container and the alginate properties that seaweed has and the fertilizer or biostimulant properties, and what if we just kind of combine those two things together? And so that's how kelp pots were born. And so what are kelp pots? They are plantable seed starters and transplant pots that are made from kelp waste and recycled organic fibers, stuff that you would find or put in your compost pile. They are made here in the United States, specifically in Washington. We source our kelp from Alaska and California. We hope to one day source it from Washington as well, but as I mentioned, the seaweed industry here is it's a little harder to get into, so there aren't as many farmers in the water as we would like. But they are also manufactured here in Washington in a small town called Pomeroy, Washington. So how do they work? Kelp pots are really designed to work with plant biology, not against it. Because they're plantable, they allow the roots to grow right through naturally, which reduces transplant shock, and it feeds the soil and the seeds as it breaks down. So the container disappears and the plant just keeps going. You don't have to remove any of the pot during transplant. We also didn't find the need to have to poke holes into the container, like a lot of biodegradable containers and plastic do, because of the natural porosity of seaweed and the way that the walls would expand when wet from seaweed. And yeah, the roots grow through it naturally, so there's really no root disturbance, and no stall after transplant. One of the fantastic things that we started learning about kelp pots is this concept of air pruning. And instead of strangling the roots, you know, as a plastic pot will continue to circle around and a plant will look for an exit point. We're not finding that with kelp pots because the natural porosity of the walls. They can breathe, the roots grow right through. With several plants, they will just air prune themselves, which encourages that lateral branching on the roots rather than that circling. So you'll start to see healthier root structure and architecture from day one. They really do break down on the plant's timeline, not all at once. I've used several biodegradable containers where the bottoms of the container fell apart before I was ready to transplant them into the ground. And then I've used others that really didn't break down at all. But the structure of this container with seaweed, we have, I'll get into this a little bit more later in the presentation. I don't know if you guys can see this, but there's some very visible speckling on the container walls that allows the microbes to eat through these individual sections and pieces, which allows the pot to really start to accelerate its breakdown once it's been planted outside from all angles. So you don't need holes, and you don't need to rip it apart, and you don't need to take anything off. So there's really no root disturbance. But the kelp isn't just it isn't decorative, it is actually functional. So the kelp compounds that are in here feed that soil and the biology, and really support nutrient uptake. So you're not just avoiding harm, you're also adding value to the soil and the system. It's not something that's considered neutral, which is what I found with most of the biodegradable containers on the market, is that they're made from one material, and that material is designed to just be neutral and just break down. But this is really intended to add a positive value. And then, of course, there's no plastic, there's no peat, no cocoa coir, nothing that's fossil based, nothing strip mined, and nothing that sticks around for decades. There's no glues and there's no binders in this pot. So if nature wouldn't have used it, we won't either. What kelp pots are ideal for growing in a kelp pot? Honestly, we've grown so many things in them, and had a lot of people grow things that I have never grown. And I would say primarily the only things that really aren't great for this are things like houseplants, unless you're going to plant it into soil. It is really designed to be transplanted into soil. And then root vegetables, like carrots, because you don't want anything prohibiting the downward root growth of those root vegetables. But we have seen fantastic results with tomatoes and peppers, cucumbers, squash, broccoli, really great stuff with leafy greens and herbs. I now grow all of my flowers in it as well. Zinnias, marigolds, we even did some dahlias in there. Great for native seedlings, pollinators, and also really good for transplants as well. I don't know if any of you really do that with your basil, or your rosemary, but now I chop and prop all of that, and I use kelp pots a lot for that. So these crops all respond extremely well because of the early root branching leads to faster establishment and better nutrient uptake after that transplant. We've seen very fantastic results with tomatoes. They are notorious for going through a lot of transplant shock. And I'll get into this a little bit later in the presentation, but when it comes to reducing transplant shock, we've seen bounce back rates of what was grown in a kelp pot be much higher than what was grown in plastic. I would say it's about 3 weeks faster to see real visible renewed growth. So basically anything that can be started from a seed and isn't a root vegetable is probably a great fit. We have had some customers that have bought some 4-inch pots and they have done some root vegetables like some onion starts, beets, rutabaga, and garlic. But as long as they're sort of that slow growing root vegetable rather than the speed of radishes or carrots, we don't want to really impede on the growth of those, which depending upon the variety that you have, a kelp pot might not break down in the time that you really need your carrot to, grow 12 inches downward. So one of the things that, we've really learned through this process is plants didn't evolve to grow in plastic. Mother Nature has been growing plants successfully before we ever got here, and before we ever invented plastic. One thing that we, really learned is most pots, especially plastic, are optimized for the logistics, really not for plants. They are cheap, durable, they're easy to stack. They make big corporations a lot of money, but biologically they create some real problems. Root circling and strangulation, which can lead to root rot, transplant shock as they leave that sort of safe cradle environment where they've established some roots but have been a little stressed out. Those roots then become even more stressed out when they leave that home and enter their new environment and have to face all of the elements of weather changes and soil changes. It puts your plants into big shock. And then what we've also found is that plastic persists in soil systems. A lot of plastic pots were not designed to be reused. Less than 2% of plastic pots ever get recycled. So a lot of people hold on to them and use them for years. I do that. But a lot of those, especially the crinkly black plastic pots, are really not designed for more than single use. Those start to leach chemicals and microplastics. And research is now finding that microplastics can be taken into the root system of plants. Our roots really act as a fiber optic cable, and even things like radishes have been found to have microplastics in them. And they're also starting to find that the presence of microplastics in soils and in root systems can reduce the photosynthesis of plants by up to 12%, and their ability to uptake nutrients. So these are all the things that I've learned in the last couple years that have just absolutely terrified me and made me really understand that we need to be moving away from plastic as growers, especially if we want to protect our soils and the health of our food and of ourselves. So our goal is really to grow how nature intended. Here's a quick look at a root system that is being strangled in a plastic pot, and then one that has been planted in a kelp pot. And these are just after, I believe, 3 weeks. So this cross section is really designed to show you how plastic containers create sort of a hard, impermeable boundary. They hit the wall and they don't stop growing. You know, they turn and they circle. And over time, they start to get really stressed out. So oftentimes you'll see that plants in plastic pots have a better head start than those in biodegradable containers. But that's because they have been so stressed out underneath the soil that they start to put all of their energy towards the stalk growth. And that's really not what should be happening in the early stages of plant development. You know, they're getting constricted root development, reduced lateral branching, poor nutrient and water uptake. Oftentimes they're sitting with soggy bottoms that will then, those roots are not strong enough that when they're transplanted, they'll break off and die. Kelp pots, however, are breathable, and because they're plantable, it changes how the roots behave from the very, very beginning. Roots will air prune, like I mentioned, at the pot edges, triggering some lateral branching and more dense root development towards the center of the root ball. And then at transplant, roots will grow through the pot and the surrounding soil without interruption. So the result ends up being faster establishment, stronger anchoring, and more resilient plants with higher yield at the end of the season. So we've talked a lot about plastic, but as I mentioned, I had tried a bunch of other biodegradable containers and I felt like they weren't very effective. So I'm just going to go over a little bit about some of the results that we've seen from others. As I mentioned, kelp pots are made from seaweed and recycled organic fibers. We're focusing on wood fibers right now, but we're also exploring other agricultural waste products like hemp and some of the other bigger ones, let's see, are wheat, beet sugar, and a few other things. Those all have really valuable properties, and nature has never let anything go to waste. And so we want to figure out how can we use some of those things that have been considered waste streams to provide value for various different types of plants. But right now we're really focused on using seaweed and recycled wood fibers. Other pots include things like binders, glues, peat, stuff that's really not great for the environment and also not great for plants. I put a question mark here because we've actually had our manufacturer deconstruct some biodegradable containers. Looking at a Jiffy pot, there were some substances in there that we weren't able to identify. And that is really scary and frustrating to know that something that is considered, you know, the largest biodegradable pot on the market has something in it that we can't identify as a natural and organic ingredient. Mm. We're one of the only companies that create things in the United States. Cowpots is another one that is US made, and Amanda is great. We're actually very supportive of each other's ventures. And that's one of the biodegradable containers that I would say works the best out of some of the ones that I've seen. But we are also the only one that is currently leveraging seaweed in a pot. And it is what I would consider to be the most sustainable pot on the market, given the resources that we're using. It is not only zero waste, but it's basically negative waste, considering we're taking the seaweed that we get is actually from a waste stream. We are working with seaweed farmers who then sell their seaweed to seaweed processors, or their farmers and processors at the same time. They will extract alginate or some various properties in a liquid form for things like biostimulants, animal feeds, bioplastics, and oftentimes what they're left with is this biomass of kelp. And it turns out that that biomass still has really, really valuable properties for plant growth. So that sort of became the basis of our formula. And then we're also using things like recycled paper with places that we can trace that we know don't have any PFAS or plastic in it, or wood. And like I mentioned, we're looking into using hemp and wheat as well. But we don't use any glues, binders, synthetic chemicals, anything in there. We are just relying on purely the nature and ingenuity and geniusness of nature, and we're just putting those things together in a smart way. So let's see if this will play. Great. So looking at the moisture retention of ours, because kelp is 90% plus water, it does a great job of not only retaining moisture, but regulating moisture. This is really looking at this video that's playing is a 10-minute time lapse looking at a Jiffy pot on the left compared to a kelp pot. What we found is that the peat pot would hold on to this moisture for a really long time internally, but it wouldn't allow it to breathe. So what's happening here is often this water is being trapped at the very bottom. It means that the water can't escape well. It also means your roots can't escape well. Biodegradable pots were really designed to solve a waste problem in gardening. And they're a step forward, but most of them fall short in a very critical way. They can't really hold on to water. Peat pots, paper pots, cocoa coir, they absorb water relatively quickly. Peat can hold on to it in the container really for a really long time, but doesn't allow it to pass through. Others pass through a little too quickly. But what we've found is that the seaweed that's embedded into these walls holds moisture longer than both or many of the other biopots that are on the market, peat pots, cow pots, paper pots, cocoa coir pots. No biodegradable container can hold moisture like plastic can because it doesn't have porous walls. But we are definitely a step in the right direction in terms of being able to retain that moisture for longer and regulate it so that you don't have to water your plants nearly as often as you do in some of the other biodegradable containers. We found though that, a lot of gardeners begrudgingly go back to plastic because of the lack of performance that they're seeing. So moisture retention was a big one that we really wanted to focus on, and seaweed is nature's sponge. It naturally contains alginate, compound known for its ability to hold water. And alginate is often used in agriculture as a soil additive for moisture retention. So by designing the pots from seaweed and these natural fibers, we've tapped into that sort of same property. Oh, one of the other benefits about this is once the pot is planted into the ground, we've also found that moisture retention continues to perform. I've found that, in the studies that we've done internally, that in an area where I'll plant something with a kelp pot and something that doesn't have a kelp pot, the surrounding soil will become drier more quickly in something that doesn't have a structure that retains that moisture sort of in the soil column. Root structure and permeability. I've talked a lot about roots, but this is one thing that we are very excited about is that the roots do not stall. The fiber matrix in this pot is breathable and permeable, so the roots will air prune through the edges and then push through the root once planted. So there's a difference between root circling in plastic and root branching in fiber. They really don't circle. They're designed to branch and then exit. And this is a quick video, time lapse, just to show you how that works over several weeks once it's been planted. So I believe this is about 2 weeks after being planted, or the video ends, I believe, at 4 weeks. I love this video, so I'm just gonna let it play once or twice, just to show you guys. We're also currently doing this experiment with a peat pot right now, just to show you how impermeable a peat pot is. And the very first experiment that we did with kelp pots was really about, is the container going to break down? Are the roots going to be able to pass through this? And here's a quick results of that, the biodegradability. These two tomato plants were grown right next to each other in my backyard. As you can see from the kelp pot, I believe this was over a total of about 4 months. In my experience, it had taken about 4 or 5 months for a biodegradable container to break down. So that's when we decided to pull these out. And to my surprise, the pot had already fully biodegraded before that time. Versus when I dug up the peat pot, the whole pot just popped right out. So that's what you'll see on the right side of this. So they are really designed to hold their structure through propagation and handling. I have some kelp pots that are sitting outside on my porch right now that have been sitting out for about 6 months above the soil. The structure is still very much intact. They really are designed to biodegrade at an accelerated rate once they are planted in the soil system and have access to um, the microbes in the soil and the beneficial insects. So why kelp? I've talked a little bit about it, but there are naturally trace elements of nitrogen, potassium, calcium, all of those things, micronutrients. They provide microbial support. We've known that seaweed is great for gardening. It's the ancestor to all plants on land, so of course it has the nutrients that other plants will need. It's a complete food. As I mentioned, it holds and regulates moisture. The alginate's a great point. It's been used as a fertilizer in coastal communities for centuries, so that was a huge nod as to why we sort of played into this. And different seaweeds have different benefits. So we've been doing a lot of research into different categories of seaweeds and different species of seaweeds and the key compounds that they provide and the plant development effects and agricultural uses. I won't go into all of this for the sake of time, but did just want to share a little bit about the fact that we are starting to R&D different species of seaweed. Right now, we have been using sugar kelp and giant kelp. We're also looking at bull kelp, but we'll be looking into the red seaweeds and the green seaweeds as well, because they often can provide very valuable uses like seed treatments, inoculations. Some work better for other plant structures. And so one of our goals with Ocean Made and with kelp pots is to hopefully be able to create different pots for different types of plants. Actually, all pots on the market right now make the assumption that one pot fits all, and that's not true. Plants are very diverse, like people, and they have different needs and they have different nutrient requirements. We all take multivitamins and medicines to help us balance our chemical loads, and so we believe that plants are very similar. So we're going to be looking into different types of pots that we can create. For example, tomatoes really need a lot of potassium and phosphorus in the very beginning to help support dense root structures, versus leafy greens like lettuce really want a lot of nitrogen in the beginning to establish those leafy greens. So our hope is to be able to tailor that in the future. We've done a lot of research in-house, and in 2026, this year, we are really focused on third-party studies with universities and doing grow trials with professional farmers and pro growers. We've done some side-by-side comparisons of of kelp pots versus plastic and biodegradable containers. We have been able to measure and observe the root architecture, which you guys have seen in some of these photos, the transplant success, and the shortened period of time when transplanting pots. We are still testing the exact breakdown time. Right now, I would say it's anywhere between 8 and 12 weeks, but it really depends on the time of year that you're growing in the zone, the temperature outside, the soil structure, the pH level, all of those things. But from the studies that we've done, it breaks down anywhere between 8 and 12 weeks. But the best part is that it starts to break down overall everywhere. So it's not like one section of it is breaking down or just the rim or just the bottom. You see that biodegradation all around the container. Let's see. We're also not claiming that any of this is new science. A big piece of the development of kelp pots has really been around what research exists already around the benefits of seaweed. What do we know about biodegradable containers? What are the common complaints that customers have had about using biodegradable containers? And how do we sort of integrate all of these principles into a container itself? So we build the product by watching roots do what they do and not guessing what gardeners want to hear. So feedback has been really incredibly valuable to us. I launched this product a couple years ago, and we bootstrapped this and put a lot of our savings into this. And I think a big reason why we haven't done larger grow trials to date is because we really wanted to validate that this is something that the market wanted. And I was reading a lot of entrepreneurial books that said, build an MVP, and if it works well enough, get it out and have people use it and let them validate that it works. And we launched this in January of last year. So, Actually, it was January 8th was when we first announced Kelp Pot, so we're coming up on our 1 year anniversary, and I am so grateful to say that we have gotten extremely positive feedback from customers. Um, Immediately, we set out a pre-sale with I think 2,000 pots to start, and we sold out in less than 2 weeks. And as people were growing things, they really validated that they do work, and they were validating it across, several species of plants that we hadn't tried. This year, we do really want to focus on having more controlled grow operations and trials. But we also knew that what you create in a lab can't be replicated for multiple gardeners because everybody grows in a different zone. Everybody grows different things. Everybody has different soil structures and pH levels, different acidity levels, different temperatures, all of those things. And so it was really important for us to validate that it was working across the board. And now this year we are making significant investments. Now that we've gotten some additional investors and some grants, we will be doing a lot of third-party validated studies as well. During the last year, we were also able to validate that this material can be used in other structures. So we're working on other sizes like 4-inch pots and cell trays, which I know are very important for master gardeners. That's been the one piece of feedback I've gotten from anyone who grows more than just 150 square foot backyard garden is that the cell trays will be much more efficient. We've also started partnering with some of our suppliers to bring kelp drops in for the indoor gardeners. As you guys can see from my background, I'm also a huge indoor gardener. And I've found, kelp pots in their current design maybe not be perfect for indoor plants that need to have their roots remain in the container, but they can still benefit from seaweed. So we've made kelp drops for propagation and for watering indoor plants. So here's an interesting anecdote and a fun story. When we started with kelp pots, the very first trial that we did was tomatoes in my garage and in my backyard. What we found was that the tomatoes in the plastic pots shot up right away. And I was crying a couple weeks into this because the plants that were in plastic pots looked so much better than what was happening in a kelp pot. They looked much more stunted than plastic pots. And I was really afraid, I had invested my savings and my time and quit my job for this. And I was really scared. But what we found was once we transplanted these outside, kelp pots were no longer lagging. They immediately took over every other plant that we had growing in a pot. My first goal was really just to make sure that we wouldn't kill anything in this pot and to validate, that the structure would work and that it could be at least comparable to other biodegradable containers that are on the market. But when we completed this experiment, we were surprised that the yield and the hardiness of the mature plants that were in kelp pots outperformed every other competitor that we tried this against. So yeah, we were really worried, but it's really a sort of trust the process moment. My husband always talks about the analogy of the tortoise and the hare, where oftentimes you will buy something in plastic at a nursery because it looks better in the start, but that doesn't necessarily mean it's going to look better in the end. Like we mentioned, things can get really busy underneath the soil, and that's really where baby plants should be spending a lot of their energy. Right now, we're currently running a trial on lettuce that's grown in plastic, cocoa, kelp, and peat. This is the very first 2 weeks. If I were looking at these in a nursery, I would probably pick plastic or cocoa just based on the fact that they look a little bit more established. But as these started to go on, I wasn't surprised at all to see that the plastic was really shooting up. This is when we had transplanted these into a plastic pot. Just because we've been growing these indoor in the winter in Washington, this isn't a trial that we could do outside. So we've done this basically in an indoor system, and we transplanted them in a larger plastic pot to basically replicate what would happen if you transplant these. So this is right at the time of transplantation. You can see that kelp is still lagging or appears to be lagging a little bit behind, but what's actually happening is the density of the root structure is being established much more underneath the soil than putting more of its energy towards the upper development and the root growth. This picture was taken just last week. As you can see, plastic has become a monstrosity, but it's also starting to lose its color and is demonstrating early signs of stress and nutrient loss. As you can see, the kelp pot has a much lusher, deeper color. The leaves on this look much healthier. And if it were me and I were to go into a plant store and pick one of these out now, I would for sure pick the kelp, but I'll let you guys make that decision. We're not finished with this experiment yet. This was taken about a week ago, but I can tell you that the newest results are demonstrating that kelp is absolutely outperforming these. The plastic ones are very stressed. They're very wilty. They look pretty gross. They're already turning brown, whereas we're not seeing that browning on the kelp. We're even seeing a little bit of that red deep into the veinous structure of the leaves, which is exactly what you want to be seeing in a lettuce. We're also starting to see really early signs of stressing on the cocoa and the peat pots as well, because neither of those pots are breaking down in the soil, whereas the kelp pot now is breaking down and releasing those nutrients. And so that nutrient availability is there for the lettuce to start to uptake. So it really is the slow grower, but I can tell you lettuce works really well in kelp pots. I had more lettuce than I knew what to do with this last year, because every single one of my lettuces performed way better than I thought it would. So this is another look at the tomato experiment that we did last year as well. You guys saw a close-up of this photo, but this is a kelp pot versus a peat pot. You can look at the biomass of this plant. This was really, all of these plants were dug up and pulled out before they had fully developed all of their fruit and their ripeness, because we wanted to be able to measure how many tomatoes had already existed on the plant without them falling off or being eaten by animals or critters. And we wanted to measure the biodegradation of those plants. So when I dug these up, the kelp pot was still fully intact. It just popped right out, so I left it on. But you can't really see it in this photo, but there is some root development that's happening above the container. So it was sitting on the surface level of the soil, which means that tomato plant really wasn't able to establish a deep root system, which is what you need for a tomato plant, especially one that's going to be, brushing in the wind and holding a lot of this really heavy fruit. So our peat pots really didn't develop much at the time, but what we were finding is that we were also producing twice as many tomatoes on kelp pots as the ones that were grown in plastic. And a big reason for that was that several weeks of transplant shock that the tomato plants went into. They had shot up right away when they were in their early development phases, but as soon as they left that home, and this is especially true with tomatoes, the plastic conduction of the pot on the plastic conduction of the tray, especially if you've got a heat mat under there, is giving a tomato plant a false sense of what its environment will be like in the future. But when you take that out of that environment and you transplant it into a new place, and suddenly the soil is different and the temperatures are different, it has to reallocate all of the energy that it should have already developed or put towards roots to doing that now. So it immediately stunts the growth of your plant, and any buds that we saw on a plastic pot or ones grown in plastic started to stall, which then means that you're going to see lower yields later. We also saw that the fruit size of those grown in kelp pots was much more consistent. And I'm not a huge tomato fan, raw tomatoes, but I had several friends taste test these, and they did say that the flavor of the ones grown in kelp pots were better than the ones in plastic. So I'm going to take their word for it. Here's just a quick look at the biomass of those plants. You can see there's obviously a clear difference in the lateral branching. We love to say this phrase that, more roots equal more shoots equal more fruits. And that is definitely true of tomato plants. We saw a lot of really main root systems develop on the kelp pot, the plants grown in kelp pots. We also saw the lateral branching. I didn't do a lot of trimming on any of these plants, just the bottom trims to make sure that, they weren't going to get wet or anything like that, or invested by critters. But you can see that the stalks of these plants are significantly thicker on kelp pots, and the peat pot is still fully intact. And this is just a quick view, a little more up close, of the root structure of those that were grown in kelp pots versus those grown in plastic and jiffy peat pots. So that is the end of my presentation, and I wanted to leave some time for some Q&A. So I will go ahead and pause there. But if you also ever want to have questions offline, feel free to reach out to me as well. I've got my email and my cell phone number down here. So I would love to hear from all of you on what you're growing. And if you have any additional questions on how they work that we don't cover in this call, please don't hesitate to reach out. So I will go ahead and stop there, and I'll hand it over to anybody that has questions. But I also wanted to leave up Larry from this group is the one that introduced me to all of you, and I created a little discount code for this group. I know we're really not focused on selling the product here. I really just wanted to give you guys a sense of how it works. But if you would like to try kelp pots out, feel free to go to our website, and we'll offer a 20% discount code, Larry Rose 20. We also do offer bulk discounts and discounts for trial growers who are interested in providing feedback and testimonials, or participating in some quantitative research with us. All right, so I'll go ahead and pause there.
Thank you so much. That was very, very interesting. In fact, I don't know if you can see my dog. She's been sitting here quietly listening to you.
Oh, she's adorable.
Thanks. I have one question from Betty. Have you tried cow pots?
Yes, I have tried cowpots. And actually, they're ones that I would say are the closest. In terms of the results that I'd like to see, we break down about the same time as cow pots. I've seen some results in different types of soils where we break down a little bit faster, some where we break down a little bit slower. I love cow pots. I love Amanda. She's the owner of cow pots. We're very supportive. We have a monthly call to just talk about how do we improve our products. But I think that they're fantastic. I will say, though, there are some binders and some glues in there that I have had concerns with using, just based off of some of the research that I've tried with just really wanting to focus on being fully organic and sustainable. So we tried to avoid adding anything new in there, but cow pots are also a really great alternative. I really have nothing negative to say about them. They are a fantastic product and company as well.
Good.
Fabulous. Does anybody else have any? Oh, here, Twana has something. Would your company consider utilizing sargassum seaweed as well due to its abundance in the Caribbean Sea?
Yeah,
And
absolutely. We really want to look at all of the seaweeds that are out there, especially ones that are creating pervasive, invasive algae blooms on shores. You know, I had learned a lot about how much people even hate seaweed for this concept. A lot of people consider it, as my husband lovingly calls it, the toilet paper of the ocean. It's this gross stuff that washes up on shore, and a lot of people are disgusted by it. But it's a really valuable resource. And so, how do we use it? Obviously, people aren't going to be consuming those, and in some instances, there are things that there are toxins or heavy metals in there. But being able to extract those elements or break those down in different ways that allows for the bio nutrient availability is something we're absolutely interested in exploring with kelp pots.
so is she. Twana says, I'm excited to try kelp pots in the future. And Betty has a few questions. Betty, are you unmuted?
No, I unmuted myself actually.
Great.
So first of all, Emily, I missed the last a little bit of your phone number. Can you show that
Yeah.
page or give it to me again, please?
Yep,
There we go.
absolutely.
2957. Okay, so I went on your website just a few, shortly after you started speaking because I'm super excited. But I was glad to hear about the cow pots, and I actually asked that question before you spoke about it in your presentation. But anyway, so you don't currently have the little seedling starters, right? But
We are prototyping those right now, actually. We're pretty close.
okay,
We don't have them ready for our website just yet.
okay,
But one of the things that I have seen in cell trays is oftentimes they weren't deep enough. So our first prototype that we went with, instead of the standard 2-inch depth, we went for 3 inches.
Okay.
But I've learned so much about manufacturing and all of the little things that go into product development. What we found was that the structural integrity by having them taper at a 3 inch sort of reduced the ability to use these when they were wet. They started to bend and fall apart right away, and it's a little bit more difficult to pack the soil in. So we've been redesigning them to take about a 1/2 inch off and make them a little bit more square and thicker so that they're easier for gardeners to use. Because that's also the big thing for me is like as a gardener myself, if I wouldn't use this product, we're not going to take it to market. So
Right.
we're currently exploring, do we make them in 10 packs? Do we make them in 6 packs? Do we make them in 4 packs? What's the easiest to use? What's the easiest to stack? What's the most versatile and what's going to provide growers with the most maximum benefit?
Okay. So would you currently then would you just put a couple of seeds in a 3 inch pot and start it? Like I just have a little garden. Uh, it's just for my personal use and so on. And then just put them in the ground when they're ready. You don't even have to take them from the little cell pot,
Yeah.
sort of thing, and water them from above, I take it,
Yeah, you can
as
water
they're
from above and below. I would say, as you're starting seeds, absolutely water from above because that's where the seed is, and you need to make
okay.
sure that they're germinating well.
Right. Okay.
But the container itself also does allow for bottom watering. It absorbs it just directly through the walls.
Okay.
And so especially if the roots have established themselves down through the bottom of the pot, you can definitely bottom water.
Okay.
But I always encourage both a top and a bottom watering. Just making sure that they're not sitting in standing water for a really long time. No roots at this
Okay.
stage really like, wet, soggy bottoms.
Gotcha.
So when I do bottom water, I will, let them sit in for water for an hour or two, and then I'll drain out the remainder of that. So then any excess moisture that's left in this pot can also drain out.
Excellent. It's fascinating. Thank you so much. Congratulations.
Oh, thank you so much, Betty. And thanks for the great question.
Anybody else? I don't see anything else on the chat. I guess that's it. And thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you
That
all for
was
having me.
wonderful. Do you have anything, Jessica, for Emily?
I do not.
Okay.
Okay.
So I guess,
Jess, did I answer all of the questions? Sorry, I don't have the list of questions up on me because I'm still in presenter mode, but I want to make sure that I hit some of the stuff. Oh, one thing I didn't talk about, you had asked about how this interacts with like mold and fungus and algae. And I'm sorry, I forgot to put that in the presentation, but I also do know that that was a big concern of gardeners and growers as well. So if we have just a few more minutes, I'd love to touch on that.
yes,
Yeah,
you,
go for it.
Okay, awesome. So because this pot is made by algae, what we found is that algae growth doesn't really persist on this pot. So that's one thing, naturally, organically. I will say, we have seen some mold and some fungus build up on these pots. And at first it was very concerning for me. But then as I did more research and also validated this with Amanda from Cowpots, the buildup of fungus and mold on your pot is actually a good thing. Really what it means is that it's doing what it's supposed to be doing, is it's starting to break down and the microbes are interacting with it and the microorganisms are interacting with it. And so some mold and fungus development on the outside of these pots is not a bad thing at all. In several of the trials that we've done, we've seen some mold, different types of mold and fungus develop a little bit on the outside of the pot, and it has absolutely zero impact on the yield that we've seen. I will say, if you're seeing a lot of that develop on the pot, make sure that you're not having these sit in too moist of an environment. We've seen it more happen where people leave them in standing water or without any air circulation or flow. So if you are seeing a massive amount of buildup on these, I would say make some slight tweaks to the environment, the surrounding environment. But overall, as long as you're not seeing mold, algae, or fungus develop inside the dirt or on your plant, a little bit of fungus and mold on the outside of a container is not a bad thing at all. It means that the microbes in the soil system are actually really liking what's on this pot. We haven't seen a lot of molds build up on the things like Jiffy Pot, which also is shows you why at the end of the breakdown of those pots, it didn't break down. It's because the microbes and the insects that are in there don't like what is ever in that container. It is not all organic and it's not all natural. So, you know, a little bit of mold, a little bit of fungus is not a bad thing at all. And in fact, it's actually a good thing. It's a very strong indicator that it will break down well in your system, and it will release those nutrients. So just want to
Cool.
make sure to cover that.
That was very interesting. Thank you so very much for joining us.
Thank you so much for having me. Also, if you wouldn't mind, I would love access to the video after this, to be able to
Sure.
share. My mom is also a master gardener, and I've got a few other friends that I'd love to be able to walk through this presentation with you, if you wouldn't mind sharing.
No, I don't. I'll send you the link.
Okay, awesome. Thank you all so much for having me. This was fantastic. Again, I'm honored to be in the company of master gardeners. I appreciate everything that you guys are doing and how you help educate growers everywhere. It's a necessary thing, and thankfully I think it's one of those things that won't be replaced by AI anytime soon. You know, the natural intelligence of our planet is really so much more powerful than the artificial intelligence that we're seeing develop today. So just thank you all for everything that you're doing, and happy growing this season.
Thank you very much.
Thank you all. Have a good one.
Thank you. Thank you.
Okay, we'll take a short break, maybe 10
Okay.
minutes, and so they'll give you time to get your tea and maybe a snack.
All right, I'm just going to end this presentation.
Yes.
Sorry, I'm having a
Thank you.
hard time getting my mouse to. Where is it? There you are. Sorry, I had it on a separate screen. There we go. All right. Thanks, everybody.
Bye.
Bye.
Oh.
Tea sounds good. Almost.